Sold the beach house. You were busy saving the world anyway. I read it 3 times standing in the arrivals hall of Tampa International, luggage carousel still spinning behind me, strangers bumping past with their rolling bags. My name is Faye Swanson. I'm a trauma surgeon. I've held people together with my bare hands in places most people only see on the news. I don't rattle easily. But that text rattled me. It was from Douglas, my sister, sent at 4:26 in the morning, like she'd been awake all night working up the nerve, or like she'd already spent the money and figured dawn was a safe enough distance. The beach house wasn't just property, it was Grandma Mabel's. 40 years of summers, of screen doors slamming, of her handwriting still penciled on the kitchen door frame marking how tall we'd grown. She left it to both of us, equal shares, explicit in the will. I hadn't signed anything. I didn't even own a pen with me overseas. I left my suitcase on the belt, walked straight to the rental car desk with one carry-on and shaking hands I refused to look at. The drive to the coast was 40 minutes. I did it in 32. When I turned onto the familiar street, my stomach dropped clean through the seat. Trucks. A crew. Someone already pulling up the old deck like it was scrap wood. I slammed the car door. That's when Phyllis found me. She came tearing around the side of the house, ears flying, beagle body moving at full speed, and hit my shins like a small missile. She'd been Mabel's dog first, mine second. Douglas had never liked her. The fact that Phyllis was outside alone told me everything about how Douglas was running things now. I scooped her up. She licked my face once and then went completely still in my arms, staring at the crew on the deck with her whole body tense, like she was telling me to pay attention. A woman in a blazer was walking toward me with a clipboard and a practiced smile, the kind of smile that means the paperwork is already filed. "Can I help you?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "You can stop tearing apart my grandmother's house." She blinked. "This property was purchased 6 weeks ago. We have a recorded deed and a signed sales contract." "Signed by who?" I asked. She looked at me carefully. "By you, Faye Elizabeth Swanson." Phyllis made a low sound in my arms. Not a bark, something quieter than that, like she already knew what I was about to find out. "If your family has ever used your name like a blank check while you had your back turned, you already know where this goes. Subscribe. Next is where I find the signature, and it's perfect. That's the problem." "That's not my signature." The records clerk looked up from her computer with a cautious expression of someone who'd heard that before. "Ma'am, the document was notarized. There's a witness seal and everything." I set Phyllis down on the floor beside me. She sat immediately, ears up, watching the clerk the way she used to watch Mabel sort through mail, like she understood that paper meant something. "I want copies of everything," I said. "Every document connected to that sale." She printed them without argument and slid the stack across the counter like it was nothing. To her, it was nothing. To me, it was a crime scene in paper form. I stepped to the side and went through it page by page. Purchase and sale agreement. Seller, Faye Elizabeth Swanson. Buyer, Coastal Horizon Properties LLC. $5 million. Clean. Efficient. Devastating. My eyes dropped to the signature line. It looked exactly like me. The slight forward lean on the F, the way the S in Swanson curves just a little too wide. I'd spent 20 years signing medical licenses, patient charts, overseas contracts. Whoever did this had studied my handwriting long enough to get comfortable with it. That wasn't Douglas. Douglas can barely sign her own name without pressing too hard. I kept reading. Witness, Nigel Hartwell. I stopped breathing for exactly 3 seconds. Nigel Hartwell had been my mother's accountant for 12 years. He'd sat at our Christmas table. He'd helped Mabel file her taxes the year she turned 80. He knew what that house meant to our family because he'd heard her talk about it every April when she brought in her paperwork. He hadn't just witnessed a signature. He'd watched someone forge mine and put his name beneath it to make it official.
Phyllis pushed her nose against my ankle. I looked down at her. She was staring at the door, not restless, not asking to leave, just staring, like something on the other side of it needed my attention. I gathered every page, folded them into my bag, and walked out into the coastal heat. My phone showed 2 missed calls from Douglas. I didn't call back. I called Osmond instead. He picked up on the second ring. "You're back," he said. "I need your dining room table and an hour, maybe 2. "Already putting the coffee on," he said. "How bad?" I looked back at the courthouse behind me. Nigel Hartwell's name is on the witness line. The silence on his end lasted long enough to mean he understood exactly what that meant. "Faye," he said carefully, "that means this wasn't just Douglas." No, it wasn't. Phyllis had followed me to the car and was sitting by the passenger door waiting. I opened it and she jumped in, turned twice, and settled with her chin on the armrest facing forward, like she was ready for whatever came next. I wished I felt the same, because if Nigel was involved, this went deeper than a sister making a desperate decision. This was planned, and someone had been planning it while I was 12 time zones away with no idea my name was being used as currency.
She used Nigel Hartwell. Osmond set his coffee mug down slowly. Not dramatically, just the careful movement of someone recalibrating everything they thought they knew about a situation. His dining room table was covered now, courthouse copies spread corner to corner. Phyllis had jumped onto the empty chair at the end and was sitting with her chin resting on the table edge, eyes moving between us like she was following the conversation. Osmond didn't tell her to get down. He knew better than to argue with Mabel's dog. "Nigel's been handling Reed family finances since before your mom died," he said. "I know. Which means he had access to old signatures, tax returns, power of attorney drafts, anything Mabel ever signed. I know that too." Osmond leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. That's what he does when he's thinking hard and trying not to say the obvious thing too fast. "Douglas couldn't have pulled this off alone," he said. "No," I agreed. "She's not organized enough and she's not patient enough. Someone walked her through every step." "Lucas," Osmond said. The name landed flat on the table between us. Lucas Pruitt, Douglas's boyfriend of 3 years, former real estate paralegal, currently running what he called a property consulting business out of a shared office downtown. I'd met him twice. Both times he'd been perfectly pleasant, in the way that people are pleasant when they're deciding how useful you might be to them. He'd know exactly how to structure a fraudulent sale, the LLC, the notary, the timeline. That's not Douglas thinking, that's Lucas building a machine and putting your sister in the driver's seat. Phyllis lifted her head suddenly. We both looked at her. She was staring at the front window, ears forward, body still. Osmond frowned. "What's she—" A car rolled slowly past the house. Dark sedan, no plates visible from where we sat. It didn't stop, didn't speed up, just moved past at the pace of someone reading house numbers. Phyllis watched it until it was gone. Then she looked at me. "Does Douglas know you're back?" Osmond asked quietly. "She sent me that text at 4 in the morning," I said. "She knows I landed. And she knows you well enough to know I didn't go to a hotel." I looked at the window. The street was empty now. Normal. Quiet neighborhood on a Tuesday morning. But Phyllis was still facing the window, still watching. "I need to talk to the buyers," I said, pulling my eyes back to the documents, before Douglas gets to them with her version of events. "Faye," Osmond's voice dropped, "if Lucas built this thing the way I think he did, the buyers might already be lawyered up." "Good," I said. "So am I." I picked up my phone and dialed the number on the purchase agreement. It rang twice. A man answered. "This is Faye Swanson, the real one. I think we need to talk about what my sister sold you." Dead silence on the other end. Then, carefully, "How did you get this number?" I said. "It's on the contract, the one with my forged signature."
Another silence, longer this time. Then, "Where are you right now?" Phyllis finally turned from the window, but she didn't relax. She put her head in my lap and exhaled slowly, like she was settling in for something long.
My wife and I wired $5 million for that property. His name was Douglas Whitmore. The irony of sharing a name with my sister wasn't lost on me. He'd agreed to meet at a neutral location, a coffee shop 2 towns over from the beach house, his choice, which told me he was already being careful. He was mid-50s, quiet energy, the kind of man who'd built something real and knew how to protect it. His attorney sat beside him, saying nothing with the practiced stillness of someone being paid to listen. I put the courthouse copies on the table between us. Phyllis sat under my chair. She'd been calm the whole drive over, but the moment we walked in, she pressed herself against my feet and stayed there, not anxious, anchored, like she'd decided this meeting needed her full attention from the ground up. "We were told the sale was urgent," Whitmore said, "that the co-owner had already authorized everything remotely, that she was a doctor working overseas and had given full authority to her sister to handle the transaction." "I gave no such authority," I said. He looked at the documents, then at me. "The woman we dealt with was convincing," he said carefully. "I'm sure she was." His attorney leaned forward slightly. "Dr. Swanson, before we go further, I need to ask, have you contacted law enforcement?" "I've filed an initial report. My attorney is preparing a formal fraud complaint. The county recorder has been notified. But I wanted to speak with you directly first, because you're a victim in this too." Something in Whitmore's expression shifted. The guardedness dropped a fraction. "The notary," I said. "Did you meet her in person?" He glanced at his attorney. "We dealt primarily through the title company. The notary's seal was on all documents when they arrived. We had no reason to question it." "The notary never met me," I said. "According to the county records, she relied entirely on identification provided by my sister and verbal assurances that I had authorized the sale from overseas." Whitmore sat back in his chair. "So the notarization is fraudulent," he said, not a question. "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. Under the table, Phyllis shifted. She put her chin on my foot. "There's something else," Whitmore said. He reached into the folder his attorney was holding and slid a single page across to me. It was an email, sent from an address I didn't recognize, but containing my full name, my medical license number, and what appeared to be a scanned copy of my passport, sent 6 weeks before the sale closed. "That email came from your sister's account, but the passport scan, we had it verified through the title company." I stared at the passport scan. It was mine, my photo, my information, my signature on the data page, but the address listed was Douglas's apartment. Someone had gotten hold of my actual passport information and altered one detail to route everything back to her address, clean enough to pass a title company check, careful enough to survive a quick verification. This wasn't Douglas and Lucas working alone anymore. This required someone with access to official document systems. Suddenly, Phyllis stood up under the table, not barking, just stood, alert. I looked toward the door. Nigel Hartwell was walking into the coffee shop. He hadn't seen me yet. He was scanning the room with the careful look of someone arriving for a meeting they'd arranged. Then his eyes landed on our table. He stopped walking, and in the half-second before he controlled his expression, I watched pure panic move across his face like a wave. "Faye." He said my name like it was something that had burned his mouth. I didn't stand up, didn't raise my voice, just looked at him the way I look at a patient chart when the numbers don't add up, and I need to find the lie buried in the data. "Sit down, Nigel." He glanced at Whitmore, at the attorney, at the documents spread across the table. His eyes did the calculation fast. He sat down.
Phyllis crawled out from under my chair and walked directly to him. She didn't growl, didn't fawn. She just stood in front of him and stared up at his face with the particular intensity that beagles reserve for things they've decided need investigating. Nigel looked at her and looked away fast. People who feel guilty can't hold eye contact with dogs. I've noticed that my whole life, and I've never been able to explain it. "You were supposed to meet Douglas here," I said. "It wasn't a question." His jaw tightened. "Faye, I can explain." "I know you can. That's why I want you to do it right now in front of 2 witnesses and an attorney." Whitmore's lawyer had his notepad out. Nigel looked at it, swallowed. "It wasn't supposed to go this far, Nigel." "It went $5 million far, Nigel." "Douglas came to me 8 months ago. She was in serious trouble. Lucas had gotten them into debt with people who weren't patient with repayment. She needed a large sum fast, and the house was the only asset big enough." "So you helped her steal it?" "She said you'd understand if you understood the full situation." His voice carried the practiced tone of a man who'd been rehearsing this justification for months. "She said you were unreachable, that by the time you came home it would all be settled and she'd explain everything." "I sent her a text at 4 in the morning. That was her explanation." He closed his eyes briefly. "The passport scan, that wasn't Douglas. She doesn't have the technical ability, and Lucas is a paralegal, not a forger. Who altered my passport information?" Silence. Phyllis put her front paws on Nigel's knee. He looked down at her. Something moved across his face. Not manipulation, not strategy. Actual shame. The kind that sits in a person's chest and doesn't negotiate. "There's a man Lucas uses for document work. I don't know his real name. Lucas called him a fixer. He prepared the notary seal, the passport alteration, the signature template." "The signature template," I repeated. "He needed samples to work from." Nigel wouldn't look at me. "I provided copies of documents from Mabel's files, old tax returns, things with your signature on them." The table went very quiet. Whitmore shifted in his seat. I felt something cold move through me that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Mabel's files. He'd reached into Mabel's grandmother's paperwork, the records she'd trusted him to keep safe, the documents she'd handed over every April with a plate of shortbread and complete faith. And he'd used them to erase her legacy. "Where is Douglas right now?" I asked. "She was supposed to meet me here 20 minutes ago." He checked his phone. "She's not answering." I looked at Whitmore. He looked at his attorney. His attorney was already typing on his phone. Under the table, Phyllis had gone still again, head up, ears forward, facing the door. My phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't recognize. "You should check on the house. Someone's been inside."
Someone's been inside. I read the text twice. No name, no context. Just those 4 words and a timestamp showing it was 11 minutes ago while I was sitting across from Nigel, watching him dismantle everything I thought I knew about people my grandmother trusted. Whitmore's attorney was still typing. Nigel was staring at the table. Phyllis was already at my feet, facing the door like she'd made a decision before I had. I stood up. "I have to go," I said to Whitmore. He nodded once. "We're not going anywhere. Call me when you know more." I looked at Nigel. "Don't leave town, and don't call Douglas before I get there." He opened his mouth. "Nigel." My voice dropped to the register I use when I need a room to understand I'm not negotiating. "I just sat across from the man your scheme cost $5 million. His attorney has everything I gave him. You are 1 phone call away from being the least cooperative person in this investigation. Do you understand me?" He nodded. Phyllis and I were out the door before his head finished moving. The drive back to the beach house took 18 minutes. I spent the first 10 checking my mirrors. The dark sedan from outside Osmond's house was nowhere I could see, but that didn't mean much. Phyllis rode with her nose pressed to the window gap the whole way, not enjoying the air, reading it. There's a difference, and she knew it. When I turned onto the familiar street, the construction trucks were gone. The site was quiet. The order to pause work pending ownership clarification had held. The house looked abandoned. plastic sheeting over the half-finished sections, exposed beams on the east side. The old blue shutters Mabel had loved were still there on the undamaged end, faded but standing. I parked on the street instead of the driveway. Old instinct. Don't announce yourself until you know what you're walking into. Phyllis jumped out and immediately dropped her nose to the ground. She moved in a deliberate line from the car toward the side gate, not the front path. Her tail was low and steady, working posture, the same posture she used when she was tracking something Mabel had hidden in the yard as a game, except Mabel was gone, and this wasn't a game. I followed her. The side gate was unlatched, not broken, unlatched. Someone had a key or knew where Mabel kept the spare, under the clay pot by the gardenia bush, same place for 30 years. The pot had been moved. Inside the house, the damage wasn't violent, it was surgical, specific. Drawers open, the small filing cabinet in the hallway pulled out and gone through, papers on the floor but not scattered, sorted. Someone had been looking for something particular and had taken their time finding it. I moved through each room carefully. Phyllis stayed ahead of me the whole way, nose working, pausing at the hallway cabinet, pausing at the kitchen desk where Mabel used to keep her important folders. She stopped at the door to the back bedroom, Mabel's room. She sat down in the doorway and looked back at me. I stepped past her and looked at the nightstand. The small lockbox Mabel kept there was open. The will was gone. Not the copy on file with the attorney, I knew about that one, but the original, the handwritten one Mabel had made before the official version, the one that had a separate addendum nobody knew about except me and Mabel and the notary who'd witnessed it 12 years ago. My stomach tightened. If Douglas had found that addendum, she'd know what it said, and if she knew what it said, she'd understand why she needed to destroy it before I could use it. My phone rang. Osmond. "Faye," he said the moment I answered. "Douglas just showed up at my house." "What does she want?" "She's asking where you are." A pause. "She's got Lucas with her, and Faye." He stopped. "What?" "She's got a folder with documents in it. She showed me the cover page." His voice dropped. "It's got Mabel's handwriting on the front."
Stall her. Faye, she's standing in my living room. 10 minutes, Osmond, that's all I need. I was already moving back through the house, Phyllis tight at my heels, nails clicking fast on the hardwood floors Mabel had refinished the year before she died. "How exactly do I stall Lucas Pruitt?" Osmond said under his breath. "The man looks like he irons his socks. Offer them coffee. Ask Douglas about her feelings. She'll talk for 20 minutes minimum." I heard him exhale, then the muffled sound of him turning back towards the living room with a completely different voice. "Sorry about that. Can I get anyone anything? Just put on a fresh pot." I locked the beach house behind me, took the spare key from under the clay pot, and pocketed it. Phyllis was already at the car. I drove to Osmond's in 11 minutes, parked one street over the way he'd taught me when we were teenagers sneaking home past curfew. I came in through the back door with my key. The kitchen was empty. Voices from the living room. Douglas doing most of the talking, which meant Osmond had pulled off the coffee offer. I stood in the kitchen doorway and listened. She's going to blow this whole thing up over sentiment. That house was sitting there rotting. Nobody was using it. I made a practical decision. With her signature, Osmond said. Details. $5 million details, Osmond said. Lucas spoke then. Quiet voice, measured. The voice of a man who decided exactly how much to say before he walked through the door. "We're not here to argue legality," he said. "We're here because there are documents that need to be discussed before anyone does anything irreversible." "What documents?" Osmond asked. The folder sound, paper moving. I stepped into the living room doorway. Douglas saw me first. She stood up fast, knocking her knee-high coffee. Neither of us looked at the spill. She looked different from the last time I'd seen her. Thinner, eyes carrying the particular exhaustion of someone who'd been managing a lie for months and was running out of energy to keep the edges clean. Lucas stood slowly, controlled, unsurprised in the way of someone who'd prepared for most outcomes. Phyllis walked past me into the room. She went directly to the folder on the coffee table. Not aggressively, she simply walked up to it, put her nose on the cover, and looked at me. Mabel's handwriting on the front, just like Osmond said. "Where did you get that?" I said, not a question. Douglas crossed her arms.
It was in the house, which was legally sold, which makes everything in it. The sale was fraudulent, Douglas. My voice came out flat. Clinical, the voice I use when I'm delivering a diagnosis someone doesn't want to hear. The deed is void. The house is still mine, which means that folder is still mine, and the fact that you're holding it right now is theft on top of fraud. Lucas stepped forward. Faye, let's be reasonable. I am being reasonable. Reasonable is me not having called the sheriff yet this morning. Reasonable has about 4 more minutes left in it. That document changes things, he said, nodding towards the folder. The addendum your grandmother wrote, it's not as clean as you think. I looked at him. You read it, I said. He said nothing, which was its own answer. What does it say? Osmond asked from the couch. I kept my eyes on Lucas, because whatever Mabel had written in that addendum, Lucas clearly believed it helped him, and the fact that he believed that told me he hadn't read it as carefully as he thought. Phyllis picked that exact moment to do something I'd never seen her do before in 11 years. She picked the folder up in her mouth, carefully, deliberately, and carried it across the room to me. Phyllis lunged forward. Phyllis! Don't, I said. Something in my voice stopped her cold. I took the folder from Phyllis. She sat at my feet and looked at me with the calm expression of a dog who'd just done exactly what she came here to do. I opened the folder, read the first paragraph of Mabel's addendum, and understood immediately why Lucas thought it helped him and why he was completely wrong.
The handwriting was exactly how I remembered it. Small, precise. The kind of handmanship they taught in schools that no longer exist. Every letter deliberate, every line straight without a ruler because Mabel's hands were steady until the very end. I read the full paragraph standing in Osmond's living room with Douglas 3 feet away and Lucas watching my face for a reaction he could use. The room was completely silent except for Phyllis breathing at my feet. The addendum was dated 14 months before Mabel died. It read, in the event that either beneficiary attempts to transfer, sell, or encumber the beach property without the written consent of the other, that beneficiary forfeits their share entirely. Full ownership transfers to the remaining party without condition or contest. I read it twice. Then I looked up at Lucas. He was watching me with the careful expression of a man who believed he'd found a loophole. She sold without your consent, he said, which means under this addendum the forfeiture clause applies. To Douglas, I said. He blinked. The clause applies to the party who transferred without consent. Douglas transferred without my consent, which means under Mabel's own addendum, Douglas has forfeited her share. I closed the folder. To me. The color left his face in a single, clean movement. Douglas made a sound, small and sharp like something had struck her. That's not, Lucas started. That's exactly what it says, Osmond said from the couch. He'd been reading over my shoulder. I'm looking at it right now. The sale was fraudulent anyway, I said. The deed is void, but now there's a secondary instrument in Mabel's own hand that strips Douglas of any remaining claim. She didn't just lose the argument, she lost her inheritance. Douglas sat down heavily on the edge of Osmond's armchair, not performing, not calculating, just sitting with the full weight of what she'd done finally landing on her all at once. Lucas was still standing, still thinking. I could see it in the way his eyes moved, looking for another angle, another door, the paralegal brain cycling through options. The addendum wasn't filed with the court, he said. It's a handwritten document of questionable legal standing. It was witnessed and notarized 12 years ago by a notary whose seal and signature are on the back page, a different notary than the one you paid to fake mine. I flipped to the back of the document and held it up. He looked at it, said nothing. Phyllis stood up, stretched slowly, then walked to the front door and sat down facing it. Same thing she'd done at the coffee shop, same thing she'd done at Osmond's window yesterday. I trusted it by now. Who else knows you have this? I asked Lucas. What? The folder. Who else knows you took it from the house? His jaw tightened. Nobody. Nigel? A pause just long enough to mean yes.
Nigel's already talking. He was at the coffee shop this morning. He met with me and the buyers and their attorney. He gave the fixer's innection to you and the document template he pulled from Mabel's files. I watched his face. How much of that did Douglas tell you before you walked in here? Lucas looked at Douglas. Douglas was staring at the floor. She didn't know, I said, did she? He said nothing. You told her the meeting this morning was routine, a final cleanup before things settled, but Nigel was already unwinding it, and you knew that before you came here. Phyllis scratched once at the front door. I crossed the room and opened it. Sheriff's deputy on the porch, badge out, calm expression. Behind him on the street, a second vehicle. He looked at me. Dr. Swanson? Yes, I said. We received a request this morning from your attorney to execute a document preservation order on items removed from the beach property. We also have a warrant for the arrest of Lucas Pruitt on charges of fraud and conspiracy. Phyllis stepped aside from the doorway, politely, like she'd been expecting this, and had simply been holding the space. Lucas took one step back, the deputy took one step forward, and Douglas finally looked up from the floor with the expression of someone who understood for the first time that the man standing beside her had never once been on her side.
They took Lucas out in handcuffs. He didn't fight it, didn't perform, just walked to the deputy's vehicle with the contained dignity of a man saving whatever he had left for the courtroom. The door closed, the vehicle pulled away. Douglas watched it from Osmond's porch. She hadn't moved from the doorway, hadn't called after him, hadn't said his name once through the whole thing. That told me more than anything she could have said. Osmond brought her a glass of water she didn't drink. Then he took Phyllis to the backyard, quietly, the way good friends remove themselves when a conversation needs to happen without witnesses. I sat across from my sister on the porch steps. The street was ordinary, neighbor walking a dog 2 houses down, sprinkler running somewhere, normal Tuesday afternoon, completely indifferent to the wreckage happening on this particular porch. "How long did you know he was using you?" I said. Not accusatory, just a question I needed answered. Douglas wrapped both hands around the water glass. "About 3 months in," she said, after the deed was already filed. "What happened 3 months in?" She stared at the street. "He got a second transfer from the sale account, $40,000. Told me it was for the fixer, for cleanup costs." She paused. "I found the wire confirmation later. It went to a private account I'd never seen. Not the fixer, not cleanup." "Him," I said. "Him," she confirmed. "So you knew he was skimming from money he'd convinced you to steal." She flinched at the word steal, but didn't correct it. That was new. Douglas had spent her entire childhood correcting words she didn't like, reframing situations, smoothing edges until everything looked reasonable from her angle. She wasn't doing that now. "I confronted him," she said. "He told me I was paranoid, that if I made noise about it, I'd be the one holding the fraud charges, because my name was on everything and his wasn't." She laughed once, humorless. He was right about that part. "He built it that way deliberately. Your name on the documents, his fingerprints on the structure, but nothing traceable." "I know that now." "You knew that then," I said. "You just needed it not to be true." She didn't argue. The sprinkler cut off somewhere down the street. "Where's the money, Douglas?" I said. "Whatever's left." $260,000, in an account Lucas didn't know about. I moved it when I found the wire confirmation. She looked at me sideways. I wasn't completely stupid. "That money is restitution, you understand that." "I know. It goes to Whitmore first for damages, then to the title company, then to the county for filing fees and fraud investigation costs. Whatever's left after that gets applied to your legal debt." She nodded, each agreement small and precise, like she was signing something with her chin. "There's something else," she said. I waited. "The fixer Lucas used, for the passport alteration and the signature template, he's done this before. Different families, different properties. Lucas finds the asset, identifies the absent party, brings in the fixer to build the paperwork. You have a name?"
"I have a phone number," she said, "and 3 addresses Lucas wrote down when he thought I wasn't paying attention." She reached into her jacket pocket and put a folded piece of paper on the step between us. I looked at it without touching it. "That goes to Sheriff Daniels, not to me, directly to him, today." I know. I was going to. "Were you?" She met my eyes for the first time since Lucas's vehicle pulled away. "Yes," she said, and something in the way she said it made me think she meant it, not because she'd suddenly become someone different, but because Lucas walking out in handcuffs had finally shown her exactly who she'd been protecting for 3 years, and it wasn't for self. The back door opened. Phyllis came around the side of the house at a trot, ears bouncing, Osmond behind her. She went straight to Douglas, sat in front of her, looked up at her face. Douglas looked down at the dog. Her expression broke open in a way I hadn't seen since we were children, since the night Mabel told us our mother wasn't coming home from the hospital. She put her hand on Phyllis's head. Phyllis stayed completely still and let her. I picked up the folded paper from the step, stood up. "I'll drive you to the sheriff's office," I said. Douglas wiped her eyes with the back of her wrist. "Okay," she said. One word, but the way she said it had no performance left in it, just someone running out of road and deciding to stop before the drop. We weren't finished, not even close, but for the first time since I'd landed in Tampa with a text burning in my hand and my whole chest caving in, I believed we might get to finished eventually. My phone buzzed. Osmond looked at the screen before I did. His expression changed. "Faye," he said carefully, "it's Nigel's attorney." I took the phone, read the message. Nigel hadn't just given us Lucas's fixer connection, he'd given us something else entirely, something that meant this case was about to get significantly larger than one beach house and one fraudulent sale.
Nigel kept records. Osmond read it over my shoulder as we stood on the porch. Not just records of our transaction, records of everything Lucas had run through him over 4 years. 12 properties across 3 counties, different families, different absent parties, same structure every time. Find the asset, find the gap, build the paperwork, split the proceeds. Our beach house wasn't the first. It was the most expensive. I forwarded everything to Sheriff Daniels and my attorney before I even got back in the car. Then I drove Douglas to the sheriff's office myself, with Phyllis in the back seat and the folded paper with the fixers' addresses on the center console between us. Neither of us talked much on the way over. There wasn't much left to say that the last 48 hours hadn't already said better. Douglas handed over the paper at the front desk, gave a full statement, answered every question without redirecting or softening. I sat in the waiting area with Phyllis across my feet and listened to my sister tell the truth out loud for what felt like the first time in years. It took 2 hours. When she came out, she looked exhausted in the specific way of someone who'd been carrying something heavy for a long time and had finally set it down, even though setting it down meant consequences. We drove back to Osmond's without talking. He had food on the table when we arrived. Nobody had asked him to. That's just Osmond. The 3 of us sat around his dining table for the first time in years, the courthouse documents still spread across one end. Phyllis under the table with her chin on my foot. Nobody performed, nobody managed the atmosphere. We just ate. 6 months later, the case was larger than any of us had anticipated. Lucas was facing charges across 3 counties: fraud, forgery, conspiracy, wire transfer violations. His attorney was negotiating a plea that would still land him several years in federal custody. The fixer had been located in Sarasota and arrested within 3 weeks of Douglas's handing over those addresses. Nigel cooperated fully. His cooperation bought him reduced charges, but not immunity. He lost his accounting license. He'd be paying restitution for years. The last time I saw him, he looked like a man who'd made peace with consequences he couldn't outrun. Douglas took a plea on 2 counts of fraud, felony record, probation, mandatory restitution from the $260,000 she'd hidden, mandatory counseling, community service. She didn't fight any of it. The deed on the beach house was formally voided and returned to my name 6 weeks after I landed back in Tampa.
The Whitmore family received a full refund through the title insurance and filed a civil suit against Lucas separately. I used a portion of the damages settlement to repair the house properly. New roof, rebuilt deck, the old blue shutters Mabel had loved restored and repainted the exact shade of blue from the original paint. I found the paint code written in her handwriting on a card tucked inside the hallway cabinet. Of course she'd kept it. On a warm evening in late October, I stood on the finished deck watching the water. Osmond was inside arguing cheerfully with someone about the music. The smell of food drifted through the open screen door. Friends from the hospital, people who'd shown up during the worst of it and stayed. Phyllis was on the deck beside me. She'd claimed the best spot immediately, the corner where the railing caught the last of the afternoon sun, Mabel's spot, the place she used to sit with her coffee every morning, watching the water like it owed her something. Phyllis sat there now with the settled authority of a dog who understood she was exactly where she was supposed to be. I looked at the gate at the side of the yard. Douglas was standing outside it. Thinner, plainer, no curated image, just my sister with tired eyes and an ankle monitor she was trying to not look self-conscious about. She hadn't tried to open the gate. Part of her probation terms included a restraining provision keeping her from the property unless I chose otherwise. She'd texted asking if she could come. I'd said yes. We looked at each other through the bars for a moment. "It looks good," she said. "The shutters?" "Mabel left the paint code," I said. Something moved across her face. "Of course she did," Douglas said softly. Phyllis had turned around when Douglas arrived. She crossed the deck, went down the steps, walked to the gate, and sat on my side of it, looking at Douglas. Not hostile, not forgiving, just present, steady, waiting to see what kind of person showed up on the other side of everything, the same thing I was doing. "I'm not asking to come in, not tonight. I just wanted to see it." "I know," I said. "I think about what she wrote, the addendum. I think about it every day. She knew one of us might do something like this, and she wrote it down anyway. She wasn't punishing you. She was protecting the house. She was protecting you," Douglas said. I didn't argue, because she was. We stood there for another minute, the sound of laughter from inside the house, the wire moving beyond the dunes in the dark. "Can I ever come back? Someday?" I looked at the gate between us, at the house behind me, at Phyllis sitting at my feet watching my sister with those steady beagle eyes that had never once lied to me. "That depends on who you decide to be when all this is over. Ask me again in a year." She nodded, turned to go. "Douglas," I said. She looked back. "She would have wanted you to find your way back. That's the other thing she would have written down if she'd had more time." Her shoulders dropped. She nodded once more, then walked away down the dark street. I watched until she turned the corner. Then I closed the gate, turned back toward the light and the laughter, and stepped fully into the life she'd once tried to sell out under me with a forged signature and a careless text. Phyllis came with me. She always did.